Have you ever walked through a modern art museum, stopped in front of a painting, and just thought, what am I even looking at? Well, you are not alone. In the early 20th century, art took this incredibly sharp, and let's be honest, pretty strange turn. Today, we're going to unpack that weirdness. We're diving into three revolutionary movements that didn't just bend the rules of art, they blew them to pieces. And really, it all comes down to this one big question. Why did art get so weird so fast? Believe me, it wasn't random. It was a direct, powerful, and honestly necessary reaction to a world that had completely lost its mind. And to really get it, you have to look at the one single event that cracked the old world in half. Look at this timeline. Smack in the middle, you see the massive trauma of World War I. It's no coincidence. Expressionism was bubbling up from all the anxiety leading into the war, while Dada and Surrealism basically exploded out of its ashes. This war wasn't just about armies. It was an all-out assault on the idea of logic and reason itself. Yeah, the early 20th century was a total pressure cooker. You have these new, alienating cities popping up because of industrialization, and then the unimaginable, industrial-scale slaughter of the war. All that rational progress everyone had believed in had led to an absolute catastrophe. Suddenly, the old rules, the old certainties, and the old ways of making art just felt obsolete. And this right here is the heart of the problem. I mean, how could you paint a beautiful, serene, realistic landscape when the world was literally being torn apart by machine guns? For a lot of artists, carrying on with tradition felt deeply dishonest. It was like putting a pretty mask on a society that was rotting from the inside out. They needed a new language. So the first major response was Expressionism. And you can think of it as a primal scream put on a canvas. Instead of trying to capture the outside world, artists just violently turned inward. The goal was no longer to show you what the world looked like, but what it felt like from the inside. Here's a really simple way to think about that shift. Impressionism is like looking out a window and beautifully capturing the dappled light on the leaves. Expressionism is like smashing that window with a rock and painting the feeling of the glass shards cutting your hand. It was a complete rejection of painting what you see in favor of painting what you feel. So how'd they do it? Well, they basically threw out the entire academic rulebook. Color didn't have to be realistic anymore. It had to be emotional. A sky could be blood red to show terror. A face could be sickly green. Figures were twisted and distorted. Even the brushwork itself was agitated, almost violent. The way they painted was the feeling. And in Germany, where this was all really kicking off, the movement split into two main groups. You had Die Brücke, which means the bridge. They were very critical, very raw, focused on the grit and corruption of city life. And then you had Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider. They were more mystical, looking for a spiritual escape from the grubby material world through abstraction and color, believing art could connect to the soul just like music does. All right, so if Expressionism was a scream, Dada was a completely unhinged, nonsensical laugh in the face of death. Dada wasn't even really an art style, it was more of an anti-art attitude. It was a full-on attack against logic, reason, and the entire establishment that had marched the world into a senseless war. This idea gets right to the core of Dada. Their thinking was, basically, if rational society could produce the absolute insanity of World War I, then its fine art, with all its harmony and beauty, was just a pointless lie. So they decided the only rational response to an irrational world was to embrace total, unapologetic nonsense. And this led to one of the most game-changing ideas in art history, the ready-made. Marcel Duchamp famously took a normal urinal, flipped it upside down, signed it with a fake name, and submitted it to an art show as Fountain. The point wasn't that the urinal was beautiful. The point was that the idea, the artist's choice, was the art. And that just changed everything. The Dadasts even attacked the idea of the artistic genius. The artist Hans Arp, for example, made collages by just tearing up paper, letting the pieces fall wherever they landed, and then gluing them down. He was trying to take his own ego and his own decisions out of the creative process. It was a protest against the whole idea of a masterpiece. Okay, but after all that chaos and destruction of Dada, a lot of artists started to wonder, what's next? They wanted to rebuild, not just tear things down. And that's what led to our final movement, Surrealism. It took Dada's love of the bizarre and irrational, but gave it a new mission, exploring the human mind, the world of dreams, and the unconscious. This is the crucial connection. The theories of Sigmund Freud were absolutely electrifying at the time. This idea that beneath our polite, rational selves, there's this hidden world of wild desires, fears, and symbols. That was revolutionary. The Surrealists thought that hidden world was where the real truth was, a surreality or a higher reality, and they wanted to find a way in. This wonderfully weird phrase basically became the Surrealist recipe for art. What on earth does it mean? It's all about juxtaposition. The idea is when you smash two totally unrelated things together, you create this shock, this spark in the viewer's mind. It yanks you out of your normal, everyday logic and into the logic of a dream. It's the engine that drives all that bizarre surrealist imagery. So how did they try to get to that dream world? One of their key techniques was called automatism. The whole idea was to switch off your conscious brain. You just let your hand move freely across a page, doodling, writing, drawing, without any plan at all. They saw it as a direct pipeline to the subconscious. And this whole exploration ended up going down two main visual paths. On the one hand, you have artists like Salvador Dali and René Magritte. They used incredibly realistic, almost photographic detail to paint totally impossible scenes, which is what makes them feel so disturbingly real, like a vivid dream. And on the other hand, artists like Joan Miro and Max Ernst used more abstract, free-flowing shapes that suggest living things without ever being too literal. So, after all that beautiful weirdness, what's the big takeaway? Well, these movements weren't just some strange phase. They fundamentally changed the DNA of what art is. They completely blew the doors off what art could look like, what it could be about, and even what it was for. And you can still see their influence everywhere today. You can draw a straight line from Expressionism's raw emotion to the huge, energetic paintings of Jackson Pollock. Dada's whole anything can be art idea is the foundation for everything from pop art to performance art. And Surrealism gave generations of artists permission to explore the strange worlds inside their own heads. They proved that art doesn't just have to be pretty. It can be a protest, a joke, a scream, or a dream. And that really brings us right back to where we started. These artists were responding to a world that felt broken and nonsensical by creating art that was, well, weird and nonsensical. Which leaves us with a final thought. When reality itself seems to be coming apart at the seams, maybe the weirdest art isn't an escape from reality at all. Maybe it's the most honest way of looking at it.